as well. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to this exciting Civilizations in Review. It's been a while, so welcome back all as we dive into this really fabulous empire. I'm here with a wonderful content writer, Emily Jimenez, and one of our all-star fellows, Sabrina Pecorelli, to chat about this engaging dynasty, Sultanate empire of ancient Moroccan glory. Before we sort of start though, I just want to remind all of you that we are live streaming this on Facebook, so welcome all on that platform. We will also cross-post this to our website, our Spotify, our YouTube, and our Instagram, so you can engage with this content in all places possible. And obviously, all of it comes off of our main website, alfuzaic.net, and head over to our Civilizations 101 section and this specific dynasty, the Saadi Sultanate, to learn all about what we talk about tonight. Without any further ado, I'm excited to jump in. So I'm going to throw it to Sabrina to read the 101 word intro, and excited to learn from Emily's research.
All right, thank you, Ben. It's always a pleasure. Let's get started. So the Saadi Sultanate was a state that ruled over present-day Morocco and parts of West Africa in the mid-15th and 16th centuries. Their rise to power began in 1510 CE, when Muhammad al-Qaim was declared leader of the tribes of the Sioux Valley during the resistance against the Portuguese, which at the time occupied Agadir and other cities. 8 sultans ruled Morocco, and yet Ahmad al-Mansur was the most successful and memorable. Upon the split between Marrakesh and Fez by 2 brothers, Abu Faris Abdallah of Marrakesh and Mohammed es Sheikh of Fez, 2 sultans ruled over Marrakesh and 3 over Fez.
What a great place to start. Thank you, Sabrina. I love to start with the question of sort of what excited you, Emily, about choosing this period of Middle Eastern and North African history. So let's start there.
Awesome. First, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to start working with you guys. So I guess what excited me the most was I'm obsessed with Morocco. I've been dying to go and visit. One day I definitely will. So when I found out that there was a dynasty that ruled over present day Morocco in the past, I wanted to know and I wanted to dive in further in the history. So it drew me to it. That, and I'm a huge nerd when it comes to Darija, which is the language that they speak in Morocco. So I wanted to expand my knowledge on the history of it. So yeah, that's what brought me to it.
Wonderful. Definitely agree with the nerdy part. I think it's a very interesting period of time, and I think that I'm also kind of obsessed with Morocco. I think it definitely inspired a lot of modern influence. Your section was really, really interesting. But since I just read the intro, my first question would kind of be about Ahmad al-Mansur, as he was the most successful sultan. And I think that was very interesting how there was one out of the 8 that ruled that kind of stood out. If you'd like to kind of start off with that and, you know, what made him the most successful and kind of what he left as his legacy.
Yeah, so he was very, very interesting. The Sultanate dynasty had several sultans. So he was the one that mostly popped out in most of my research. So he drove Morocco into the most successful era that it had during the time. And it was after the Three Kings battle. So after the Three Kings battle that his brother Al-Malik won, and unfortunately he passed away after the battle, Mansur stepped in and he took over his place. So his reign was so powerful because he secured an alliance with England to combat over Spain. And this created such a complex trading relationship between the 2 countries of animal hides, metalwork, and sugar. And not only that, but it further perpetuated their economic prosperity amongst both of the countries. So with that being said, he also managed to expand Moroccan's rule over present-day Western Sudan and Sub-Saharan Africa. And then he created a route that actually ended up selling gold. Unfortunately, he was kind of a character because he was a little bit oppressive. So this route obviously transported slaves as well. And then it also transported salt, which expanded more economic prosperity for him in the end. Yeah, so he was kind of a character, but unfortunately his rule was very, since it was very oppressive, it was hanging on a thread. So the moment that he kind of stepped down from his authority, his sons took over, and the Moroccan dynasty ended up going into a civil war and destroying the dynasty altogether. And it separated it, and then that's when unfortunately the Ottomans came in and took over.
That's interesting that how he was the most successful and, you know, his demise eventually ended the entire dynasty.
Yeah. I
Very
think it's
interesting.
poetic justice in a way.
Okay.
It's fascinating to me how succinctly you just categorized like 400 years of Moroccan North African history in that one breath, basically. Very fascinating. I want to sort of jump a little bit ahead to modern Morocco, because if I'm not mistaken, after the Saadi Sultanate was the Alawites, which is now the modern like dynasty. Is that correct? I want to make sure I have that.
Yeah, no, it
right.
is the modern dynasty. They currently operated under their current ruling system was a system introduced by the Sultanate dynasty, a political religious legitimacy, and that's the one that they're operating under.
Yeah, so I mean, it's interesting that this is, I mean, that was, 500 years ago, but this is the last empire before what we now know of as Morocco. So firstly, thank you for writing about this really important piece of, this influential country in modern geopolitics. So I just wanted to sort of place that for all of our listeners who may not know a lot about Moroccan history, that this is the last empire before now the modern. Granted, 500 years ago, but the modern country of Morocco is a relatively older one, and it was immediately preceded by the Saadis and losing that battle. So I just wanted to sort of place that. Fascinating, first and foremost, that there is all of this Saharan trade as well as engagement with Portugal and also England. I think what's interesting about the more modern empires, I mean, because we have several empires that are 5,000 years BCE. So the fact that you're 1500 CE, pretty recent in the grand scheme of things. What's fascinating is many of these European powerhouses, as we know them today, also operated and were powerhouses 500 years ago. And so it was kind of a lot more like political governmental statecraft in a way than it was empires and trading, which I just find really interesting. I don't know if you want to chat more about that, or your reading that and researching the trade and the engagements, but I just find that really cool about the more modern empires that are on our civilization section about that aspects.
No, 100%. So as we know, since it was very recent, they had a very large majority of influence over current Morocco. So the Saudis were the first ones that created Sufism, and it's still respectively in Morocco till today. So I thought that was very, very interesting the more I dived into it, considering that it kind of opened up the pathway through that. So on top of that, their influence over Moroccan architecture in current day is beyond me. It was beautiful when I was researching it, and I definitely plan on going there one day. So there was actually a madrasa that was created by one of the sultans, Ali ibn Yusuf. So he created the school in Marrakesh, and it was the largest madrasa there during that time. It housed over 900 students. So I thought that was amazing to just know about. Unfortunately, they did close it down in 1960, which was very, very recent, and they reopened it in 1982, and it's currently a public historical site. So if you want, Ben, you could definitely stop by and take a look at it.
Wow.
Yeah, it was beautiful, and you guys could definitely switch up pictures. And the whole entire building is completely covered with geographic shapes. It doesn't have any writing or any symbols or anything like that, but it definitely influenced current Morocco and its architecture that it's now. So I thought that was amazing, as well as the architecture that was derived from this time period. Masur, he actually he created the El Badi Palace, which is up today in Marrakesh. It's sort of a little bit ruined, but it's still beautiful, and it still has a lot of history. So definitely, if you guys are in town, go check it out.
Definitely have to make a stop there sometime. I really, really like the North African architecture, and especially the one that you're talking about right here in Morocco. And I think it's incredible that something that was created so long ago, because okay, in the grand scheme of things, 500 years ago is not that bad. But for example, my dynasty was the Qajar dynasty, and they were until 1925. So talking about the 1500s for me is kind of a lot further down the road. And I think it's wonderful that something is still standing from such a long time ago.
Yeah, it carries so
Incredible.
much history and breadth. And on top of that, you know that obviously the culture is still talking about this dynasty till today,
Yeah.
because it has so much influence on it. And I find it very interesting too that I had to personally go out of my way to research it. But the culture there, they're so entrenched with it. They know it by hand. By the back of their hand, which I thought was so cool. And especially it gives you, knowing the Saudi dynasty gives you a new perspective on North Africa as a whole. And it makes you understand the current geopolitical situations that are happening there right now, especially since Morocco is a perfect pathway to Europe, and it's great for any economic trade that's happening there. So yeah, the Saudi dynasty definitely opened that up for current day.
So talking about, Morocco and Northern Africa, like I mean, if you know the Saudis, how are their relations with the other civilizations or dynasties in the region? Because we can see here that they clashed a little bit, especially with Europe, with the Portuguese king, Sebastian I. But how were their relations with the regional groups?
By regional, are you referring to the Ottoman Empire?
Yeah, I mean, before they took it over.
Right. So it kind of varied. So during Al-Mansur's time period, he ended up establishing a nice grounding with the Ottoman Empire. So they did, during his reign, they had some of a peaceful relationship. But before that, there was always tension, just because the Saadi dynasty, they said that they derived directly from the Prophet Muhammad, from Fatima's bloodline, which was his daughter. So of course, all of them are Muslim and they practice Islam. So just saying that you are a descendant from the Prophet Muhammad is showing your kind of established dominance over the region in a way. So they kind of felt threatened through that. And this correlation to the Prophet Muhammad derived from the Banu Zayeden family, before the Saudi dynasty actually began its rule. So they originated from the Suez Valley. So from there, that's when they started saying like, oh, by the way, we're descendants. So that's when everybody started taking them seriously, and that's when they elected them leaders of the tribe, which eventually ended them their pathway through the Saudi dynasty. So yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Very interesting.
Incredibly fascinating. Yeah. One of the things I really resonated with in your writing is in your history section specifically. I would say probably a good 70 of the 80 empires we have on our website, the name of them is the ruler or the first king or the last name or the river that they're nearby. Something like geographical and or personal is the name of these empires. But the Saadi is off of the Arabic word meaning happiness. And I thought that was just so interesting and so different compared to basically every other empire dynasty out there. I mean, the Alawites after them is named after the Alawi family, right? So I'm just curious if you have any more background information on why they're named, I guess, technically the happiness dynasty, the happiness sultanate. I think that's just so fascinating and different if you have more information about that.
Yeah, so I thought that was really interesting. Just like how you said, how you put it, especially the Saudi name does not correlate at all to the original family. So I was like, where did they come up with that? I couldn't find a lot of specific information when it comes to that, but I know it derived from the original person that claimed himself the prophet of a descendant from the prophet of Muhammad, Bani Zayeden, which was the original family. So they're the ones that kind of derived this name and said that this is going to be the mark of our dynasty. That's from there on, they were known as the Saudi dynasty.
That's very cool. Yeah. Very unique, you know? I did have one question about your ruling system. The last sentence of your paragraph I thought was very, very cool. You say the Saadi Sultanate created a strong association between the status of sovereign ruler and descendants of Muhammad's bloodline. And I'm pretty sure that goes back to the fact that they said that we were related to Fatima's, to the daughter's bloodline. Did that obviously created issues outside with the Ottomans, but within the Saudis themselves, did that make them stronger?
Yeah, it definitely made them stronger. So for the people of the Sultanate dynasty, they view the Sultan as like the ruler, the all, basically like a direct descendant from God himself. He had a direct correlation with providing food, providing any health resources, and providing security. So that definitely created, since he was since he had the term a direct descendant of this prophet, it gave him extra status. Like he can't be unchallenged, he can't be overthrown. So instead of ruling, sort of like trying to understand what his people want and what's best for him, everybody just followed along. Since his word was the end it. He decided everything.
It helped him consolidate his power. That's very cool.
Yeah.
There we go. Fascinating. One other piece I thought was interesting as well. Again, most of these empires either trade a bunch or do a bunch of wars, and which is pretty common for a lot of these empires throughout history. But most of the warfare is generally like sword or cavalry, and there's like gunpowder and like, you know, rifles and whatnot as a part of this empire, which again is, because it's so much more modern, it is a very fascinating aspect here. You don't need to go through military history by any means, but just the fact that there was gunpowder-based weaponry in this empire, and obviously the Europeans that they skirmished with.
Right.
If you have like any more background information about that, I just found that incredibly interesting too. Again, this is just so rare. You know, a large majority of our empires are in the BCE or, you know, pre-Islam. So the fact that not only is there, you know, modern European countries, more or less, as well as gunpowder, as well, I don't know, there's just a lot of fascinating tenets here. So if you have any more information about that, I'd love to hear.
Yeah, of course. So to understand why they were so advanced for their time, especially during al-Mansur's time period, you have to go back to the Battle of the Three Kings, right? So before Spain started kind of pressing towards Morocco, before Spain even became a player in the Actra region, it was Portugal. The Portuguese King Sebastian, he wanted to take over Morocco because he already established his ground in some parts of Africa. Take over Morocco to spread his Christian faith over this Muslim territory. So he sent his men over 20,000 men into the Actra region, and he had mass artillery. He was prepared to go. His army was very, very well trained. So the two brothers at the time, eventually what ended up happening was that they sent their forces. So they didn't have the same level of artillery that the Portuguese armies did, but they had over 50,000 men. So obviously they outnumbered them by 30,000. So the result of that was that the king ended up drowning. His troops ended up retreating back to the coastal line, and the other two kings, Al-Mahin and Al-Mahik, they died. One of them died the day of, and he drowned with the king, and then the other one, Al-Malik, he died the next morning with serious injuries. This opened up the pathway for Al-Mansur to take over. And since the Three Kings battle was such a success for the Sultanate dynasty, it allowed them to kind of establish this prestige in Europe, and kind of brought the attention of England. And then England decided to open up those trading pathways. And like I mentioned before, of the animal herds and all this, like salt and everything that they had to the trade. And then eventually they ended up trading gunpowder, and then they got their gunpowder through England himself. And then boom, they were back on the ground, and that established their dominance in the region as well. Yeah.
Wow, incredible. It seems like a very rich history of a dynasty. Did you have any issues researching more in the terms of like finding information and having access to information. Were there a lot of sources, a lot of documents on this dynasty particularly?
No, there was
Not
not a lot.
surprised.
There was definitely I found a lot of it through like through Britannica, a lot of history today. I saw a lot of videos as well. And there were a lot of blogs of people doing their own personal research on this, from people from Morocco themselves, giving their own types of research. But a lot of the stories that derived were kind of passed down through generations of generations. So they were very secondhand as opposed to in the history books. So yeah, I kind of just put all the pieces together. I started reading everything one by one and seeing, okay, where are all the gaps? Where can I fill them? Which I think was very, very surprising just because they're such a very interesting dynasty and they carried so much weight over Morocco. So I don't know why there wasn't enough information on them, especially from really, really credible sources, especially in Morocco. I would expect them to be writing some stories about them, but there was nothing.
Yeah,
That's
I
kind
feel
of
like
a common theme with a lot of our
yeah,
Alphusaic empires. I know you're just about to say that, Sabrina.
that's exactly what I was
it-
going to say. It's
it-
kind of a trend we've been noticing.
Yeah, I would say, if not all, a large
Yeah.
majority, finding these resources is really hard, which is exactly the reason it is the first project all of our writers do.
Yeah.
To educate, connect, have all in one place. I know there's more empires we don't have, and maybe one day we'll get to all of them if
We will.
possible. But the point is that the Saadis is pretty well known, relatively recent, and still difficult to find research on. And that is a very common theme with most of these ancient empires, and a big reason why Civilizations 101 is such a cornerstone of Alphusaic and the first project every writer who joins us does. So plug to you, if you're interested in adding to that library, please join us at alphusaic.net/write for us, is to really build out that library and gain. So, I mean, I know it was a little bit easier for you, Emily, just because they're modern Morocco directly comes from Saadi. So, I mean, I know it was still difficult. I don't want to knock your research. Thank you for doing it all. But I mean, I know many writers who've had very difficult times finding any sources and end up going to like rare coin trading websites for like information about the dynasty because of the coin. Like, and that is in some ways some of the information all that we have. So yeah, I'm thank you for sharing that. It's a great perspective. And yet the secondhand sources are kind of the strongest ones, and even descendants in modern Morocco, modern wherever in the region from these empires. So again, just thank you. And you too, Sabrina. I know you wrote a different empire, but still thank you for working on this project to really, build out this library of knowledge, of history, of showcasing what makes these empires so excellent. Obviously the architecture, which I could talk about for days and go explore. I've been to Marrakesh and Fez before and have been to these places in the neighborhood, as you say, so lovely.
I have to see
and you will definitely be there soon, I know it. But to have these other influences, the political structure, the trading routes, very clearly, all of those components are all embedded here. And just again, thank you for taking the time to really focus on it.
No, it was my pleasure. I had a great time.
Incredible. So as we sort of wrap up, any final questions, Sabrina, that you have for Emily about the Saadi Empire?
I think I'm just gonna go with, what is your favorite piece of information from everything that you've learned, everything you've researched, just that one thing about the Saadis that is just gonna stay imprinted in your head forever?
It's a good one. I think for sure it's definitely going to be that they're the first ones that established and made it acceptable to practice Sufism in Morocco. I thought that was so interesting. You just really didn't know the origins of it, and I thought that was amazing to actually know where it originated from in the first place, just because that version isn't really commonly practiced.
Very, very cool. I think mine is going to be that Saad means happiness, and that's kind of where they wanted to take their dynasty with the name. I thought that was so cool, very, very creative.
Yeah, very, very, very fascinating. Yeah, incredible pieces here. And I'm going to guess partially their alliance with the Ottomans is how Sufism became so well known throughout Morocco, given
for sure
a huge connection 100%. There too. I just love, I mean, that's just so interesting. The religious component as well of these empires is something I find very, very fascinating. So thank you for sharing that. My final question as we wrap up today, and there are so much more to listen to dear audience member listening right now. So please go make sure to go to the website, alfuzaic.net, to the Saadi page to learn all about the things we haven't talked about and get lost in all the great hyperlinks and resources that Emily included. But my very, very last question here, again, focuses on your history section. It's just so packed and powerful. I'm really, really curious on the word Sharifi or Sharifian. I know that's sort of the name of the community dynasty, but if you have any sort of additional pieces as we wrap up here, I would love to hear.
I only have very little information when it comes to that one. I was as well a little bit confused on the origin of it. I tried doing a little bit more research on it. I just couldn't find enough, so I kind of just put it in as a little kind of point of information, just in case if any of the readers and audience wants to add any of their intakes, they could definitely message us and give us any extra information or any extra history lessons on that one. But yeah, I'm so sorry. I don't have
No, you're good. I mean, as far as I'm aware, that means basically descendant of the prophet. It is what that word specifically means.
And
But I was
definitely
just curious if you had more background.
No, and it definitely correlates back to obviously his claim, well, their claim on the Prophet of Muhammad. So I can understand why that was a very important piece on it.
Well, there you go. Now we have that definition defined. Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Sabrina, as well, for chatting us through. And thank you, listener, for engaging with this really fascinating empire. If you've ever been interested in Morocco, this is the predecessing empire to what we know as the modern country. So a lot of modern things you see in Morocco happened during the Saadi time period. Thank you so much, Emily, for writing about it and all the future articles you will. Thank you, Sabrina, for your interviewing and engagement and just excitement on this region. So go check it out, everyone. alfuzaic.net. That's alfusaic.net to read more and explore. Have a great evening, all. Thanks so much.